And again, for those of you just joining us, we'd love to hear from you in the chat about what you're hoping to get out today. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So first, I want to introduce myself. My name is Leora, and I am the VP of Product at Easy Health, which is a healthcare startup in LA. And today, we're going to be hearing from Jordan, who's accompanying me here on the Hop-In, about tools and strategies for negotiating compensation with confidence and with context. So please continue to share in the chat about some of the reasons that you guys are looking to, like what skills you're looking to gain today and what you're hoping to learn. Also, I want to take this opportunity to please complete your Hop-In profile. It's in the upper right-hand side of the page. If you click on your initials, or if you have like an avatar, you can click on that as well. And this will open a box where you can put in your information and a photo. And that allows you, it'll allow you to exchange contacts more easily when we move into the Blender phase of this workshop. And one more thing, I know that the news has been really heavy and on our minds. Our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine and people affected by war. And so we wanted to acknowledge that that is the backdrop that we're having this conversation in, and acknowledge that there's a wider context to what's going on here. So without further ado, I'd love to formally introduce Jordan. And the series in general is part of Women in Products Blender events. It's the organization's goal to connect the community year-round with tools and techniques to help you guys thrive and a chance to connect with peers that are also looking to build skills and community. So after we hear from Jordan, we're going to break into one-on-ones and practice what we've learned at the Hop-In Blender, which will be the opportunity for you guys to interact with each other. And then we'll rejoin for QA. And we've also left a little bit of time for you guys to network after close. So I'm excited to introduce Jordan at 81 Cents. I know she mentioned to me earlier that she actually started 81 Cents through something she posted in Women in Product. So it's perfect to have her here sharing back with the community. You can find a full bio in the description below our video. Do you guys see that?
Oh, wow. I'm just seeing that.
Yeah. So there's a full bio there where you guys can learn a little bit more about her, but I'd love to get the ball rolling and get started. So Jordan, tell me a little bit more about how you got 81 Cents started. Like, tell me about like what inspired you to, and tell us more about 81 Cents.
Awesome. And I just want to quickly thank Leora for jumping in to host this at the very last minute. So very much appreciate that. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here today. As Leora mentioned, I launched 81 Cents in the Women in Product Facebook community about 3.5 years ago. I was at the time like very frustrated by some of my own negotiation experiences and frustrated from kind of hearing from friends and family members about their challenges with negotiation as well. And I noticed that most of the people who seemed to struggle the most and who in particular really struggled with the confidence piece and kind of having access to sort of this inner network of data and information tended to be my friends who are women, my friends who are women of color, people of color. And obviously that connects to like much broader trends and things we see playing out around the wage gaps where women earn substantially less than men on the dollar, women of color earn substantially less than white women on the dollar. And it's all part of this, broader theme of pay inequity. And so I didn't know anything about it. I certainly wasn't a negotiation expert. I'd actually always really struggled to negotiate myself, which I think is partially why I was interested in it. But I was curious to learn more, and I had read a couple of books. And so I just posted in the Women in Product Facebook group to see if anyone needed help negotiating and if anyone wanted just someone to talk it through with. I was interested in doing user interviews, and so figured the best way to understand the problem would be to try to work with people who are going through it. And I was totally overwhelmed by responses. I think like 70 people reached out to me between direct messages and commenting. And I was really surprised by how impressive the people were who had reached out. I was sort of thinking, oh, like people who are in the first couple of years of their career who are so new to the working world will probably reach out. But I had several VPs of product, SVPs of product who'd reached out as well. And it made me realize that this really is like a problem that, yes, it certainly does get easier over time, but it is challenging regardless of what point you are in your career when you do it. And most of us have never been taught how to negotiate. It's not something that you're taught in school, even if you take, business courses. And it was at that point that I realized that this is really, really pervasive. And what I learned through coaching and kind of working with women from the Women in Product group that summer made me realize that this isn't just about like kind of telling people what to do. There's some underlying confidence issues that need to be addressed. And I thought that the best way to address that quickly would be to try to get people the data that they need to really negotiate confidently. So yes, data is really helpful in a negotiation for being persuasive to, a recruiter or a hiring manager on the other side of the table. But it's also incredibly helpful for building up your own confidence, because when you realize that you are being underpaid, or when people who are doing the exact same work as you, often with, either the same or even less experience, are making more, suddenly you're not feeling so timid about asking, you're feeling angry. And if the company you're at isn't going to pay you, you're going to go somewhere else. And we've seen this kind of firsthand at 81 Cents. Our model is really about going out to the market and trying to do the market research for candidates that they're often, don't have the network to do themselves, or don't want to do themselves, because it's really uncomfortable to go out and talk to people about money and ask people, what are you earning and is my offer fair? And so we've decided to kind of like take on the role of doing that research. I think another reason why we are excited about our model of kind of going out to source data for candidates as well is oftentimes when you're going through negotiation, you talk to people that you're comfortable with. And if you tend to be underrepresented, you might talk to people who are also underrepresented. So the data that you're then sourcing is skewed, just inherently knowing what we know about pay and equity. And so what we try to do at 81 Cents is go out to this big network of advisors that we've built. We have on the platform at this point like 2,000 hiring managers and recruiters from major tech companies across levels. Like we have people in the C-suite, people who are at the most senior levels. And so we ask them, like, what should someone in this kind of role be earning? And we actually send candidates offers to those advisors to get their feedback. And they effectively score the offers and say, I think that you should be earning significantly more. And there's something kind of tying back to the confidence piece. There's something incredibly empowering about having 10 people who are, 5 to 10 years ahead of you in your field saying, without a doubt, you are being underpaid. You should be earning at least 30% more. And if you don't earn it here, like I'll interview you and you'll earn it somewhere else. So that is kind of 81 Cents and how we got started through Women in Product in a nutshell.
That is awesome. And it sounds like such a valuable service. So can I ask, how does someone who's listening to you and interested in the service, like how does someone actually engage with 81 Cents?
Yes. So basically we have two main products. Our kind of one that we've been running for the past 3.5 years or so is called a market value report. And basically a candidate will come to us when they're in the new offer stage, the interview stage, or even just looking to get feedback on their current pay to kind of make advances in their current role. You can order a market value report on our site. We have a discount for Women in Product members. And basically, we'll then ask you a bunch of questions to understand kind of what you're earning today, and then what you have questions on where you need support. Do you want data? Do you want guidance? Do you want us like support on figuring out what to say? Do you want help analyzing your equity package or figuring out, I want to ask for more, but like, what should I be asking for and what part of my compensation should I be asking? Like, should it be focused on bonus? Should I focus on equity? Should I focus on base salary? Should I focus on all of it? Like, there's so many different variables that go into negotiating. And so we try to work with candidates to see like where they need the most support. And then we basically take your background information, anonymize it, and send it out to our network of advisors, specifically people who are in your function, your industry, and have similar kinds of experiences that you do. And for every candidate we support, we try to get somewhere between like 4 and 8 different perspectives from the market. So basically, we're trying to go out and say, like, here's a pulse on kind of what the market is like today. These are from people who are actively making offers right now, who are actively hiring people, who are actively recruiting candidates. Here's what they think you should be earning. So we try to get like very real-time data for candidates. And then that all gets compiled into a big PDF that we call your market value report. And that's ultimately what we send back to candidates.
Wow, I can really see that giving candidates a leg up, because definitely when you come to like a negotiation with like, oh, my advisors have said this to me, I think that just that alone can change the confidence that you bring in. So one thing that I noticed as you've been speaking is that this is like really personal to you, and this is something that like you, and I love it when a founder is solving a problem that they face themselves and that they really experience. Can you tell us a little bit more about your own experience with offers and negotiation, and like why is this so personal for you? Like, what's your story there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I remember when I got my very, very first job offer, I was so excited that like someone wanted to employ me. And I remember I called my uncle, and who I'm very close with. He's sort of like a lifelong mentor to me. And I told him, like, Uncle Dennis, I got a job offer. Like, I'm set. I think I was like still had a few months left before I graduated college. So I was just on cloud 9. And he goes, Jordan, that's great. Congrats. What are you countering with? And I just was like shocked. I was like, what do you mean countering? I have no previous full-time work experience. They want to like pay me to do something I've never done before. And he was basically like, this is how the world works. Like, you need to start negotiating at your very first job offer. Everyone around you is going to be negotiating. And if you don't, you're going to be behind from day one. And I guarantee you the company is expecting you to counter. And so I like begrudgingly let him show me how to negotiate. And we put together an ask and a counter offer. And I was asking for like, it was a low paying job. And I was asking for just like a little bit more to make up for like cost of living differences. And I had a relevant internship. And I was, absolutely terrified, like couldn't sleep the night before, get on the phone with the hiring manager, make the ask. And he like thought about it and was like, yeah, we can probably make that work. Like, let me talk to someone. I'll get back to you. The next day emails me and he's like, yep, no problem. Like, here's the updated offer. And I was like, what? I was angry. I just couldn't believe that like no one had told me that before, and that this is how it works. And how would anyone else know this if they weren't like as privileged as I was to have like this uncle who had relevant business experience to what I was doing. So that was like kind of my first experience with negotiation, and then continued to negotiate and continued to really struggle with it. I mean, it just always felt so uncomfortable to me. Like, I'm a pretty extroverted person. I like to think I have high EQ, and these conversations were always so incredibly painful. And I was going in with like this supportive mentorship network and this, like people in my life who were telling me how to do it, which I can totally recognize that like the majority of people aren't lucky enough to have. And so at a certain point, I had one like very bad negotiation where I felt I was made to feel like very guilty and very like, I felt ashamed for asking for more money. It was a startup and they were like, look, no one's working here because of the money. Like, if that's what you want, like maybe this isn't the right fit. So they're like threatening that maybe it's not the right opportunity. I was asking for like so little, like looking back on it, like it was a very like reasonable negotiation ask. And I was sort of like bullied. And not to mention there was equity in the offer, and my uncle didn't know about startups. So he was like, sorry, like can't help you with that one. So I just didn't ask for any more equity. I focused all my ask around base salary. Fast forward a few years, the company has gone on to do really well. I watched so many people negotiate after me. I did end up joining, and they just gave out equity like it was free candy or something like that. So I like was certain I could have gotten more equity, but I didn't know to even ask for it. I didn't understand. It was confusing. So I just kind of like pushed, just ignored it. And so after that experience and after realizing like I really kind of messed up that ask, I decided that I needed to get more serious about it. And that's when I started thinking more about starting something and kind of exploring like what other people's experiences were like, because I knew that like mine was challenging, but I also knew I had been just given this like very lucky leg up. And so what could it possibly be like if you don't have someone who's kind of guiding you through it?
There are three things that you said there that really caught my attention. The first is that a lot of people, a lot of the advisors we might naturally go to, like parents and relatives and older people in their careers, might not fully understand the startup equity package or the tech equity package. I know I've also had challenges explaining that piece of my comp to people and just understanding it myself, let alone explaining it to someone else. So I really think that's an underrated piece of the negotiation experience that you guys help with, is that sometimes the advisors you go to don't understand that piece of it. And then something else you said that I think a lot of us can relate to is like there's two kinds of like negative experiences you have with an offer. One is like you push too hard and you hit that wall with the hiring manager, and they start to like make threats about fit and not being able to afford you, or like things that make you kind of feel bad. And then there's the flip side, which is if you don't do that, if you don't hit that wall, you might feel remorse,
Right.
and wish you had gone for more. So it's like there's like this sweet spot somewhere in between, or that like I think a lot of us want to be in, but we're struggling to not end up on either. It feels like a really narrow band, and we're like afraid that we're going to hit either wall.
Totally. And now that I know so much more about negotiation, I actually know it's a good thing when you run into a limit, because it means that you're like maximizing, like you found past the upper band. Often when you get like a yes too quickly, it's a sign that like if you're trying to maximize your pay, which there are a lot of other things you can try to maximize, and that may not be the priority for everyone, but assuming that it is the priority, if you get a very fast yes, you can almost think of it as like there's probably more on the table there. And so I personally have tried to make myself become more comfortable with getting a comment like, hey, like you're really pushing us here, or no one's ever asked for this much before, or like that's not really conventional, like I'll see what we can do. But if you're getting the like, yep, no problem, here's 5K more, great, like you asked for more money and you got it, that's awesome. And like there's probably still more there.
Definitely. So you've been doing this for a couple of years now. You've probably dealt with, I don't know, tons of women who have been in the same shoes as you, myself, and all the women in this chat. What are some of the like recurring themes? What are the fears and challenges that you see holding back women from negotiating? And like, what are some of the like, can we do some like myth busting when it comes to that?
Yes, definitely. So at this point, 81 Census supported, I want to say like 850 or 900 candidates.
Amazing.
So we see a lot of the same things come up over and over again. There are so many myths, and like they're myths for good reason, I guess I would say. Like there are reasons why people have kind of intrinsic beliefs about what it means to negotiate. So I totally get that, but I do think like one of the things that I'm on a mission to do is help people kind of break them down. So I'd say the first one is that you need to be aggressive to be an effective negotiator. A lot of people think that, oh, like all negotiating is the same. So if you're good at haggling at a street market, or if you love going to buy a used car and like that sort of negotiation, if you're good at those, then you must be good at negotiating. And if you're not good at those, if you don't like those, if those make you really uncomfortable, you're kind of running, you're sort of screwed when it comes to negotiating professionally. And actually, like they're very different experiences. What it takes to negotiate professionally is like very high EQ, very strong sense of perspective around like what other people, like what's happening on the other side of the table, what is going on, like what are hiring managers dealing with, what are they thinking about, like really putting yourself in their shoes to understand like what are they what are they incentivized to do? They're incentivized to get, people into companies and fill roles as quickly as possible. So like having sort of like that broader understanding, there's a lot of research that shows that, especially as women, like the more like understanding you are and the more appreciative you are, like actually has a better effect on your negotiation. So just because like you don't love like haggling and like going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth at like a car dealership or something doesn't actually mean that you're not like well positioned to negotiate. And I think particularly as women, it's an unfortunate double standard, but like using sort of the like inherently like feminine qualities of like empathy and putting yourself in someone else's shoes and being like strategic and understanding where everyone else is coming from, like those can actually be real advantages. So that's the first myth. The second myth is, we just see so many people who are scared of getting an offer rescinded. And look, I get it. Like there are horror stories out there. There are also companies who are bad actors and will take away an offer. Like that does happen, but the chances of it happening are so incredibly slim. I've probably spoken with like 500 recruiters at this point and hiring managers and whatnot. And like, it comes up, it's like less than 1% chance of it happening, less than 1% chance of it happening. And I really think there is sort of this new understanding of like when offers do get rescinded, it's like, this was not the right fit of a company or organization. And I think that can be like really hard to kind of accept, but usually like there's something amiss like culturally at the company. If you're making like a thoughtful, respectful, well-informed ask and they're just like out of the blue ghosting you or saying like wrong fit, like I think it usually means that there's something bigger going on there. But it really happens like so much less than people think that it happens. And then I'll say like to today's market, it is an amazing time to be a candidate looking for new roles and negotiating. Like if the odds of getting an offer rescinded were 1% 3 years ago, like it's 1% today. Like it just, the market is so hot for candidates. There's so much demand from companies. You have so much more power when it comes to negotiating than you used to have, which is amazing.
Can we pause right there? Because this is
Yes.
clearly like a hot button topic. A lot of people are thinking about like, I'm seeing a lot of questions about offers getting rescinded. So if I'm taking notes, I'm thinking, wow, I'm very unlikely to have the offer rescinded. If the offer is rescinded, it's probably in my best interest because there's something probably going on at that company. So I feel like that's like a message to really hit home with this group is that like that it's not a real fear. Like worst comes to worst, they tell you you're a little bit too expensive and like that's really the most they can do. The offer being revoked is not something that Jordan is saying actually happens. Like often at least, or by companies that you'd want to work for. And then the third thing that you said that I feel like is really important is that it sounds like it's really a candidates market. And when I'm hiring, I definitely see that as well.
Yeah, it's a really hot market right now. The demand from companies is like, there's just a lot more demand than there is supply, especially if you're in a function like product management, which is just like growing so much and there's just so much of a need for. So it's really an amazing time. And I think that there's a lot of like leverage and power that comes from knowing that. And then the last thing is like, there's a difference between a company saying, hey, that's higher than we can go, and we're taking this offer away from you. Like you can get a no and still have the job offer there and then get to decide if you want to take it or not. And like I was mentioning earlier, like I actually think it's awesome to get to a point where they're like, that's higher than we can go, because then you've like found kind of the upper limit.
Awesome. So back to myths and like common like fears and challenges that you see. Is there more you wanted to touch on there?
Yeah, just the last one is that a lot of people think that they don't really have leverage to negotiate or can't make a strong case if they don't have another offer on the table. And of course, like it is helpful to have another offer. I will not like lie about that, but you still have so much leverage without one. And like the majority of the candidates we work with don't have other offers and are still able to negotiate on average like an 18% increase in comp. And so there are other things that you can use as leverage. One is you can just even be in like the interview process at other companies, like phone screens, first round phone screens. You can say like, I'm interviewing at other companies, and companies will want you to stop that and like focus on them. So that can be kind of one kind of leverage. Relevant work experience, if you're in like any sort of a niche industry or a small market or anything like that becomes really relevant. I mean, there are just like so many things like that. And even just saying like, unfortunately, like this offer just isn't good enough for me, and I don't need to take it, like kind of recognizing that like you don't have to take the first job offer you get. If you're in like, the position to be able to turn down a job offer, I think can be like can give you a sense of confidence and leverage that you might have otherwise missed.
Yeah.
I guess just one more point on this, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is like, I think that, when I've done job searches in the past, and sometimes I've waited to search until I was absolutely miserable at my company and just in so much pain that I was really willing to take like the first thing that I got. I would recommend not doing that, especially in today's market. Like, you could be really happy at your job. Doesn't hurt to take a couple of like recruiter calls and see what else is out there. That will give you like a really good sense of your market rate and help you, I think, like cultivate like that more confidence so that you realize you have, more leverage than you think.
Great. So I want to do one more question before we head into the networking session. And I know we've talked a little bit about equity here, and I know you've mentioned like that there's like 3 numbers everyone should know when negotiating an offer. So what are some of the alternate forms of compensation someone could keep in mind, and like what are the 3 numbers that that everyone should know when they're looking at an offer?
Yes, I actually have a couple of slides on this that might be helpful. Let me see if I can find
Let's get those up.
Cool. Okay, so talking about non-cash compensation is like my favorite topic. Very niche interest, but I just think it's so important and we just don't talk about it enough. Okay, so let me walk through these quickly. So the reason why I care a lot about this topic is because I just see over and over that individuals have basically a bias towards base salary and often give up a ton of leverage in negotiations because they're so singularly focused on it. And I've done this too. Like I mentioned, I had this job offer where I had, equity, base salary, and I just focused completely on base salary and like totally missed that there was more there that I could negotiate. And often it's like you're basically just making the pie smaller for yourself by like zooming in too much on one component. So we tend to think about compensation in terms of 3 major categories. So the first one is monetary. This is probably kind of obvious, but it really impacts like how much money you're able to put into your bank account every year. So base salary, of course, but also bonus, assigning bonus. And then if you're at like a big public company where the stock is publicly listed and you have the option to sell it, stock can be, a form of monetary compensation. The second bucket is what we call near monetary. It's basically any type of compensation that prevents you from having to spend money. So if you get free lunch once a week, depending on what you eat for lunch, that's like $5 to $20 that you don't have to spend buying lunch, which allows you to keep more money in your bank account. Same goes for like generous relocation package, commuter benefits if you work in person, and healthcare. There's a lot here. And then the last bucket is non-monetary. And these are things that don't impact your wallet per se or your bank account, but they absolutely impact your quality of life in a really meaningful way, such as company culture. Do you like your coworkers? What is the work you're doing? Do you have management responsibilities, opportunities for travel, learning and development, things like that? So I think it's really important to think about all of these and really think about all of them before you actually start interviewing and negotiating. So you have sort of like a baseline understanding of what you want. And then that gives you something to like react to when you're getting offers and like seeing compensation packages come in. Part of the reason why I'm like obsessed with talking about this is because there's just like all of these things that I'm mentioning can be negotiated. And often, actually, that's where companies can move the most is outside of base salary. Because often with base salary, they have like these really tight ranges, but the other parts of compensation are not necessarily as like strictly regulated, I guess, or strictly set. So these are examples from 20 recent negotiations that we've seen. And so you can see that base salary moves for about a third of these offers, but you can also see that like so many other offer or parts of the offer moving as well. And if you focus, like you can often move multiple levers. And if you focus too much on one, it means you're probably ignoring or leaving money on the table elsewhere.
Wait, so these are actual offers you guys have helped people negotiate?
Yes, these are actual offers. So we, work with a candidate before, and then we measured like the delta and see where they're able to end up.
That's awesome. Someone got an extra 50K of comp. Someone got 10K in signing bonus. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you can see like, big, small increases. We're not sharing obviously where these offers start, so like the percentages are less clear, but you can see that there's really significant moves, especially at startups. Like one person increased their equity by 50%. That could be incredibly meaningful in the future. It could also amount to nothing. Like that's why these things are really challenging. Also, I think that this singular focus on base salary often leads people to like the wrong conclusions about offers. So here's an example of this. These are 3 business development roles in tech in San Francisco. And they all have base salaries around 140K. So if you just looked at the base salary and talked to a friend who's in a similar role at a similar kind of company and asked them about their base salary, you might think like, oh, like I got a fair offer, awesome. But then if you look at these other components, you see that the total comp actually looks really different. And there are really big differences that happen, but not in terms of base salary. And the last reason this is really important is not just because you have leverage there, but this is where we see a lot of inequity. So women tend to earn on average 81 cents on the dollar. It's actually 83 cents now, but that's where our name is drawn from. But when it comes to a benefit like equity, the gap is much more substantial. Women earn 49 cents on the dollar for every dollar of equity that men earn. And this actually even controls for differences in like representation at the founder level. And as far as I'm aware, there's not actually publicly available data on how race impacts equity and like what the pay gap is for equity when you break it down by race. So it's like just I'm on this campaign to get people to think about the pieces of pay that are outside of base salary. And just to close with, if you want to take a screenshot of this, these are like some of the kinds of comp that fall under every category. So you won't necessarily be able to negotiate for like, increased retirement or something like that. But if you recognize that like your retirement package is under market, or you used to have like a better retirement package, like that's a place where you could like leverage that for an increase in signing bonus or base salary or something like that.
Awesome. And that definitely hit home with me. I know my co-lead for the Women in Product LA chapter, she and I have talked about this, and we discovered that I've always gone more towards startups. She's gone towards like more established companies. And that equity piece was really making a big difference in our overall comp, even though our salaries were fairly comparable. So it's really cool to see you lay it out like that, where like the base is the same, but these equity packages are making a huge difference in overall comp.
Yeah, totally. It's really hard to realize these things. And that's why I think networks like Women in Product are so important, because if you don't have people in your life to like teach you this kind of stuff, like how are you supposed to know, especially if you're newer in tech or product?
Awesome. So I'm seeing a lot of really great questions in the chat, which we will definitely get to in our Q&A session. So stay tuned. At this point, I'd love to break into our Blender session. So the Blender is an opportunity for you guys to connect one-on-one, and it's I want you guys to take this opportunity to discuss what came up for you around like negotiation mindset. So did you identify with any of the myths and fears around asking for more? Were any of the mental shifts that Jordan kind of presented like useful for you? I know some of you've already shared that you're already going to use some of this going forward. So I'm really excited to hear that. So if you want to go ahead, we're going to do 2 sessions. They'll be about 6 minutes each. So if you can go ahead and click on the blender on the left, you should see like a little red now button. And if you click that, you'll be able to join and be paired with someone else. So let's go ahead and get started. Go ahead and click on that, and you guys can kick off your sessions. Hi, what is your question?
Hey, Rebecca.
Nice to meet you guys. It's so great to hear your expertise, and thank you so much for sharing everything with us. I was curious about how you kind of bundle your asks. So I've always heard that like you kind of need to shoot for one specific item like salary or equity, and then although other parts of the offer are it's more risky to like shoot for a later start date or do things like that. So just curious if you had any tips or advice on how to approach negotiating the entire package.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing I typically advise candidates to start with is like, you want to start a conversation about pay, not by talking about money right off the bat. Ironically, that can make kind of the person on the other side feel more defensive, and it can feel like more transactional. So that's a great opportunity to get out like all of your other questions about the offer. Like, do you have questions about the vacation schedule or holiday schedule? Do you have questions about in-person versus remote versus hybrid? Like clarifying questions. I didn't understand this part of the benefit package, that kind of stuff. So it's great to start with that. It also can be a good idea to start with some questions like understanding how performance is evaluated at the company. What do the first 90 days look like? What you're doing here is like you're showing that you're really thinking seriously about the offer and that you're trying to understand like how you can do a really great job. So you're sort of like building the goodwill of the person on the other side. They're like, oh, like this person's serious about this. They're really trying to envision themselves at the company. So that's the first thing I like to start with. Second is like, it's really helpful to understand like which parts of the compensation package you're really trying to optimize. Like how far short are each of them falling of kind of like your ideal. One thing that can be really helpful is to think about like the total compensation. And depending on like your risk profile, you may include equity in that, you may not include equity in that. But like definitely think about like what do kind of like your base bonus, signing bonus if it's there, and like 401k, maybe like what do all of those mean in terms of total compensation? And then how far off is that from like your really like ideal sort of aspiration point? Once you understand that, like, here's the total gap I'm trying to close. And then you might have some ideas on like how you would prefer to close it. Like I would prefer a signing bonus because I'm trying to put a down payment on a house tomorrow. So like more cash now would be helpful. Or I know I'm really motivated by incentives, so I'd actually prefer to have like a larger possible annual bonus because it'll like make me work really hard. Or I really want to focus on base salary because I'm trying to like build long-term savings. And I know that the more I earn in terms of base salary, the larger my bonus will be, the larger my pay next year will be, the larger my promotion, all of that. So then you can like come up with sort of like your preferred way to close. Or maybe you don't really have a preferred way and you're really just trying to maximize all together. Then you can go to a recruiter and say like, hey, like, it looks like we're about this amount short of where I like really need to be in order to accept this role. Like, I want to be flexible in terms of how we get there. I would be really happy to take like an increase in base and a small increase in equity. But really my preference would be like a larger increase in equity and a smaller increase in base, like whatever it is. And you want to have like a spreadsheet where we're making sure these numbers like add up. Also, if you are more flexible in terms of like taking a bigger bonus and lower base salary or more equity and lower base salary, you should like be asking for more there because there's like more risk built into what you're asking for. So typically, I guess what I'm trying to say is I actually like to talk about total compensation with a recruiter or with a hiring manager and then like work together to figure out how to close the gap. When it comes to things like PTO or these like non-monetary benefits, I think it's like I typically say like ask about those after, like get the big stuff that's super, super important and is going to like determine whether you like take the role or not out of the way first. And maybe for someone that is like the number of days of PTO. But for most people, they're like trying to see if there's more there, or they're like, yeah, like I'd love to be able to be remote 1 day a week. And right now, but like, that's not going to make or break whether I take it. Like you want to think about your ask in terms of like, what are the things I need to figure out to know if I can even like take this role or not.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm going to move on to the next question. I know we're running a little bit short on time, so we'll try to wrap it up. We'll make room for 2 more live questions. Inviting Mozzie.
That's me.
Hi, Mozzie.
Hey.
Hi. I was like, no, that's me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was having audio issues earlier. Okay. So Jordan, the information you've shared has been great and super helpful. How do you approach for like larger companies where everything is based on like band? So band positions, you automatically get this percentage of equity or this amount of stock or whatever it is. What levers do you pull there, especially when things like PTO are unlimited, but you still want to make sure that you're maximizing your opportunity?
Yeah, definitely. That's where understanding your level becomes really important. So at a lot of big tech companies, you know, they have very fixed bands based on what level you are, but you can often, it's by no means easy, but you can make a case to be put at a higher level. And unfortunately, like one of the side effects of companies becoming more rigid with levels is we're just seeing more bias in terms of how people are put in certain levels. And I know there have been like lawsuits at Google and whatnot because of that.
And Jordan, you mean like promotion, right? Is that another way of saying how people are promoted is becoming an issue, or
more of like how you're actually like at Google, for example, you can be like an L1 product manager, you could be like an L4 product manager. And so, yes, you'll get promoted over time, but often if you're like interviewing from the outside coming into the role, then they're going to decide like what level should you be at. And if you weren't at an Amazon or a Facebook where they literally have charts saying an L7 at Amazon means an L6 at Google or whatever it is, like if you're not coming from one of those roles, then you're sort of like at the discretion of the company to figure out where to put you. So that's where like obviously the importance of interviewing and being confident and showing how senior you are can be really important. That's also where the importance of network comes into play. Like, can you talk to 5 people at Google to figure out how the leveling system is working, and get guidance on like how to position yourself for the next level up? That's also where I see like, you know, if you're in the interview process with other companies, like that can be really helpful to say like, you know, I'm in the interview process at other companies and I know that they're considering me at like higher levels than this one. But often negotiating around the level is like the best way to make sure that you're maximizing your comp. It can also be like tricky if you are to go into a company at the very high end of a band, because often companies have a fixed amount of time, like a rule around how long before they can promote you. So if they can't promote you before a year in the role, or 18 months in the role rather, but you're at the very high end of the band, like there's no possible comp increase. Whereas if you come in at the lower end of the band, like you have a full band to move up before you need to like make a case for a promotion, which, you know, you might be ready to do in 18 months or something like that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, in a situation where I came in low, have been promoted, but I'm still low. So, you know, now it's like, well, what levers can I pull to kind of move up a little bit? Thank you very much.
It's tricky when you're in a role already, unfortunately. Obviously, you can do a great job and maximize bonus and whatnot, but really like looking at other opportunities or getting an offer from somewhere else is probably, if you're like really serious about drastically transforming your pay, that's probably the best thing you could do to ensure you're maximizing it.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Mozzie,
Thank you.
and thank you, Jordan, for your time today. As part of our close, I would love it if you could share, like, if there was like one thing like people should write down on a Post-it note when they're negotiating their job offer, like what would that one thing be?
It's a good question. I think the one simplest thing you could fit on one Post-it note would just be to pause. It can be really impactful in a negotiation to say less. I think often if you are someone who, you know, cares about what people think of you and is like nervous and you're really trying to get like sort of that validation from the other side, it can be really easy to fill silences with, oh, but if you can't do that number, like I'll take a little bit less. I really want to make it work. You know, you can just like fill the silences. And so I think making your ask and then just like waiting and putting the pressure on the hiring manager, the recruiter to respond and try to convince you why you should join. I think that's really powerful. And certainly the negotiations where I've done the worst have been the ones where the person has like mastered the pause on the other side.